I am Nikki Childs, and I am going to be doing my speech on Tim Burton. Tim Burton, a crazy, unconventional film director. Tim Burton has had a part in some of the most famous movies of all time. You may have heard of one of them, whether it be Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Alice in Wonderland, or Big Fish. I, for one, have seen almost every single one of Tim Burton's movies, and I have yet to be disappointed. He is my favorite director of all time, which has inspired me to speak and inform everybody about who he is and what he is famous for if you don't already know. Tim Burton is different than the rest, different than any other Hollywood director that I know of. He has visually stunning features, he has intense imagination, creativity, he shows a dark side, and has a lot of fantasy. Tim Burton's eye for detail, creative mind, and insane imagination is leading him to be one of the most famous directors in the world. Tim Burton is and was always a shy, artistic person. He grew up surrounded by the world of film, even from the very beginning. Tim Burton was born August 25, 1958 in Burbank, California. Burbank doesn't seem exactly as popular as Hollywood was, but it was home to many film and television studios. He was raised in a typical 1950s American suburbia, but he was not a typical child. As much as his parents wanted him to be normal and go outside and play with the other kids, Tim Burton would rather be locked away in a dark room watching 1950s horror films. Tim Burton was not exactly a star student. He didn't exactly read books. He was the kid in the back of the classroom drawing in the notebook. But that kind of artistic side of him and that talent started to begin his career. Drawings on paper then turned to Disney animation drawings his second year of college. Burton attended the California Institute of the Arts. CalArts was famous for new animators. Even though they offered good coursework, Disney animation program was something that Burton decided to take his second year. He wasn't in love with being an animator. In fact, he hated it, but he thought it would be a good way to break into the business and could lead him up for a potentially decent career. He found pleasure in painting horror films, but instead started working with Disney and was drafted as a conceptual artist. Working with Disney, Burton started to work on one of his first films. As Fox and the Hound did not exactly help him inspire his true talents, they did help him break into the world by working on a film called The Black Cauldron. Once Burton started working on The Black Cauldron, he was able to put a little bit of his personality and touches into the movie. The magic, the wizardry, all the fantasy and imagination and creativity only made Tim Burton want to do more. Tim Burton did not enjoy being an animator. Even though he liked working for Disney, it was not something that he felt he wanted to do for the rest of his life. The studio recognized his talent was not being utilized. That's how he broke into The Black Cauldron. Even though he was not liking everything he did, it did help him meet one of his mentors, Vincent Price. Vincent Price and Tim Burton then went on to work on The Nightmare Before Christmas and a live-action short film called Frankenweenie. The two didn't receive much exposure in the beginning, but it did open up Tim Burton to the world where he was set free to work on his own designs. Tim Burton then started working on pictures like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, and then after Beetlejuice became a hit, Tim Burton started his own production company, which led him to work on a very famous film called Batman. Batman was one of the big box office hits, leading Tim Burton to stardom. With one box office hit under his belt, making millions of dollars, Tim Burton finally had total freedom of his creativity. Tim Burton then began to work on other films, Edward Scissorhands, which brought him to start a long-lasting relationship with Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp, since working on Edward Scissorhands, has had a close friendship, most like family, with Tim Burton and has worked on almost all of his movies afterwards. Tim Burton then began to produce more, write more screenplays, making even more romantic movies like Big Fish. He wanted to show that even though he loved horror and fantasy and things that others might deem as creepy, he could be a true softie at heart. Tim Burton, even though he was famous in Hollywood, is not seen as being someone who's normal, and he's quirky and weird, and that's something that really hit home to Tim Burton. The reason I like him is because he is unusual, and I feel that I can relate to that. One of my favorite quotes is by Tim Burton, addressing this same matter. Tim Burton says, "I have a problem when people say something's real or not real, or normal or abnormal. The meaning of those words for me is very personal and subjective. I've always been confused and never had a clear-cut understanding of the meaning of those kinds of words." Tim Burton, even though many others may not see him as normal or abnormal, to me, is leaving more of a difference in the world than anybody else. His eye for detail, creative mind, and insane imagination has led him to be one of the most famous directors in the world. Even as a child, drawing on a notebook to drawing for Disney led him to make one of the biggest box office hits, Batman, to finally showing what he's made of in movies such as Alice in Wonderland. With a style all his own, Tim Burton takes our childhood imaginations and makes them a reality on the silver screen.